In this presentation, we're going to continue looking at academic writing, and we're going to look at research essay writing in particular. First of all, let's consider essay structure. The exact essay structure of a research essay depends on the discipline, but this is a rough idea of the essay structure for a humanities essay. So we start with the title, we have the author name and affiliation, who they work for, who they represent, an abstract, an introduction, possibly a literature review, a discussion of the methods used in the research, a discussion, the findings, and then a discussion, what are the implications of the findings. Finally, a conclusion. And then at the end, we have acknowledgements, a list of references which are referred to in the text, and any extraneous information which doesn't actually fit into the body of the text, that will go in the annexes or the appendices. Let's look at essay introductions to begin with. What we need to do is we need to look at the purpose of the introduction and look at the content or the structure of the introduction. And then we should consider with the students a number of examples. Now, we could give the students examples, or the students could go and find examples and then come back and present their findings. This second version is much more powerful in terms of learning. And then, of course, we need to practice writing introductions. Introduction should address three questions: what, why, and how. The what is where we need to be specific about the topic of the paper, introduce the background, and define any key terms or concepts if necessary. The why section is where we tell the reader what new material or what new insight we are offering, or what important issue does your essay help define or answer. The how will tell the reader what to expect from the rest of the paper. It will briefly present the key elements of the paper in the chronological order which they appear. Let's look at this example of an introduction. The first sentence explains the what. The second sentence explains the why. And the last two sentences explain how this question will be considered. This is another example. Again, the first sentence explains the what. The second sentence explains the why. And the last three sentences explain how this is actually going to be done. You can have a closer look at the PowerPoint presentation to actually carefully read this example. Now let's look at essay paragraphs. With our students, we need to discuss the structure of paragraphs and teach them how to do this. Again, we need to look at examples and practice writing. And just like with introductions, it's much more interesting if the students go and find examples of paragraphs and look at the structure for themselves. We might want to use this way of looking at the structure of paragraphs. So we need a topic sentence. This is usually the first sentence. We need evidence to support whatever we're writing about, and we need examples. And we need an explanation of the example, and we need some kind of closing statement. Now, this is not always followed, but these are the possible elements. Let's look at an example. In this example, we have a clear topic sentence. It's about what Pinker says. And then we have a comment with the writer's opinion that this is not necessarily true. And then we have evidence to support the writer's opinion of the topic sentence. And this paragraph is coherent because of the linking. This links back to the quotation. The 3-year-old repeats a 3-year-old earlier and links back to it. This quote links back to the quote. And these examples illustrate or give evidence for this statement here that 3-year-olds are not masters of most constructions. Now let's look at citing others. We need to discuss with our students why we should cite others and how to cite others, either by quoting them or paraphrasing what they think. We should look at examples, of course, or send them out to find good examples, and we should practice citations. There are different systems. I'm familiar with the Harvard system mainly. I use a version of that. And this shows different ways of citing in line in the text. The key thing here is to be consistent and to use the system properly. It doesn't really matter which system you use, as long as you use it all the way through the work. The paragraph we looked at a moment ago has 2 different ways of citation. The first sentence starts with the name, with the date of publication in brackets, and then the quotation and the page number which is taken from. Quotations should always have the page number. And then the final sentence summarizes what a number of researchers have done and then just references them. It's very important that we explore with our students which verbs they use to cite writers, because the verbs we use show how we feel about what the other authors said or think or suggested. So there are a large number of verbs which we can use, like state, suggests, thinks, argues, highlights, claims, and things like this. But the mere fact that we use a present form rather than a past form shows our opinion. If we use the present form, we say this is still relevant, it's still worth thinking about. Maybe this idea hasn't been challenged. But if we use a past form, we're suggesting some kind of distance. Now, it might merely be time distance, but it might also be a suggestion that this idea is no longer valid. It's an old idea. So just by choosing stated, we're suggesting a distance between now, the current research, and this suggestion or statement in the past. It might be outdated or outmoded, no longer current. So we should explore the choices which authors make and suggest to our students that they need to think carefully about what verbs they use and what form of the verbs they use when they paraphrase or when they quote authors. In this example, the writer suggests that this Chomsky idea is an old idea. He claimed in the past, and he later argued again in the past. With distancing ourselves, or the writer is distancing himself from Chomsky's claim. Here, though, Pinker's 1994, still last century, still in the past, is used with a present verb, and this suggests that this idea is more current, more relevant. And notice the different ways of referencing page numbers. Again, it's important to be consistent in whatever system is being used. And again, in this one, Bugrand argues. The writer has chosen argues rather than argued for a 1997 reference to suggest that this is still something which should be taken seriously. Now let's look at essay data. We should explore with the students what kinds of data presentation they can use, talk about why, the purpose of data presentation, and more importantly, how to refer to the data in texts. We should look at examples, or ideally send them off to find examples and then come back and present on what they found. And then we should practice writing descriptions about or references to the data in the text. There are different kinds of graphs which the students should be familiar with, and they might want to produce such graphs in their work. Here, in this example, we have a table which is labeled properly, and it's referenced in the text by this sentence. States that there are 4 stages to this argument. As we can see, 4 stages, A, B, C, D, as summarized in table 1 below. So there's an explicit reference. So it tells us what the table is. We need to be able to talk about data. We need to be able to say what the tables or the charts or the graph show. We need to be able to include percentages or numbers in the text and give a link to the actual figure which these are from. But we ought to not present the whole, all the data which is on the graph or the chart or the table and talk about it in the text. It's not like an IELTS Part 1, Task 1 in the academic writing, where this task is to describe the data for someone who can't see the graph. In our text, they can see the graph and they can look at the graph and they can study the graph. So our job is merely to highlight the most important data from the graph, the main finding or the main findings. We don't need to describe the whole graph. The essay conclusion. For this, we need to talk about the purpose of the conclusion, talk about the content or the structure of the conclusion, and again, study examples and practice writing. Now, the conclusion is designed to help your reader leave the paper's argument, to round things off, to go away satisfied. To do this, we need to go back to the thesis statement, restate that, trace the course of the paper. What did we look at? Show that what we did look at proves our thesis statement. Show how we've settled issues raised in the introduction or discussed the more general consequences of the argument, and maybe outline any questions which we raised but could not answer. We don't just ignore them. So let's look at an example. Again, you can look at the PowerPoint and look at this in more detail, but this restates the what and the why of the paper. This is the beginning of tracing the course of the paper and commenting on it and showing how it proves your thesis statement or the purpose of the paper. Again, we continue through the paper, going over again and saying what we proved or what we showed, or what we highlighted. And another paragraph bringing Krashen and Chomsky together. And then the final paragraph looking at the general consequences of the argument in the paper. But here we can tidy up the style a bit because we don't need in conclusion. We know it's a conclusion, it's got a heading, so we don't need these sentence initial phrases, as I said before. They're implicit in the text, so this is not necessary. So we need to be careful of the style. Then, once we've written the paper, we generally look at producing an abstract. So again, with our students, we need to discuss the purpose of an abstract. Why do we have an abstract? And then look at the content and the structure of the abstract. Look at examples and practice writing. Now, abstracts can be explicitly structured and they can have headings, objectives, methods, results, conclusions. Or they might just be a paragraph of text, as this one is. So here, this sentence restates the research question, presents the study population, presents the methods, presents the main findings, and then a conclusion, the implications of the study. There should be a list of essay references. Now, these references are only the articles, the books, which are referenced in the text. They're not extra reading or reading which you haven't actually used. They have to be mentioned in the text. And just like citations, use one system and give some practice tasks. An easy practice task for references is go to Amazon, find 10 books and write references for them using the appropriate system. So, what have we looked at here? We've looked at abstract. We looked at abstracts at the end. We looked at introductions. What should be in introductions? We didn't look in detail at the literature review or the methods or the findings or the discussion. But what we did look at is paragraphing, citations, and data. And we need to explicitly teach those. And then really, the student should go and explore and discover what's in the literature review, what's in the methods, the findings, and the discussion sections. And that's a much more useful way of doing it than actually presenting all these things in detail to the students. You can do a minimal presentation, but really the real learning should be happening when they're exploring these things for themselves. We looked at the conclusions, and acknowledgements and references and annexes and appendices can be discovered by the students themselves.